That started. Awesome. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Digital World, Mentoring Strategies to Combat Cyberbullying. We're so glad that you're here today with us. Feel free, as we're giving folks a minute or two, to drop your name and where you're calling in from in the chat. Definitely want to get to know all of you as much as possible, and really tailor this conversation to the folks who are in the room and especially the kinds of work you're doing where you are. You'll see in a little bit that the panelists we were just talking are all kind of spread out throughout the country. So I think we're going to get a lot of really cool perspectives, not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of experience and expertise. So for folks who are just joining in, I was just saying thank you for being here. While we're waiting and giving folks another minute or so to join, feel free to drop your name and location in the chat. I'm seeing Maria, you're from San Diego. Actually, I don't know. I'm so bad with geography. I'm going to San Francisco later this week. I don't know if those places are close, but either way, California, love California, North Carolina, Mississippi, Virginia. Awesome. 8-hour drive, so not close at all. Virginia, New Orleans, Ohio, Alberta. All right. Canada, Denver, Colorado. I see someone from Baltimore. I'm also in Baltimore currently. That's where I live. Great to see a fellow Baltimorean. North Carolina, Colorado. Awesome. So for folks who are just joining in, we're just letting folks settle in, but thank you so much for being here with us today for this really amazing conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. And it's called Navigating the Digital World, Mentoring Strategies to Combat Cyberbullying. So we'll give it a few more seconds. And we will get started. So this webinar series is a project, and as well as the National Mentoring Resource Center, is a project that's funded through a cooperative agreement from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, otherwise known as OJJDP, Office of Justice Programs in the U.S. Department of Justice, in collaboration with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, and the NMRC, which again stands for National Mentoring Resource Center, builds on OJJDP's history, leadership, and investments in quality youth mentoring. And I'll get into a little bit more about what the NMRC offers. So all of this that I'm about to say is free, which is amazing. And there's a really amazing and robust kind of collection of resources for all levels and all roles within the mentoring field housed within the National Mentoring Resource Center. We have a really amazing practitioner-focused blog where you can get to know some other practitioners in the field, hear their stories, their successes and challenges. We have all sorts of evidence-based resources, evidence reviews on programs, models, and various populations. We also have a really incredible research board constantly at the forefront of a lot of the conversations that we host these webinars on, but also in terms of our various resources on the NMRC website. And then you can also apply for training and technical assistance, which is at no cost for your mentoring program, and they can provide all sorts of things from help developing recruitment plans to assistance with some of your training of your mentors and mentees. So definitely feel free to take advantage of those things. Remember, we definitely want to hear as much from you as possible. I know that everybody is muted, and that's just for the best possible sound, but we do still want to get to know you all and hear your experiences, your insights, and your thoughts. And really build this out to be a conversation amongst all of us. So use the chat feature to introduce yourself, talk with one another, share resources. If you have something that's worked for you in the past, feel free to drop that in the chat as well, and then respond back to us. So make sure to say if you appreciate a certain point or if you have a differing point, drop that all in the chat. And then if you have any questions, you can click the Q&A button, and there's an anonymous option if you'd like that. To leave any sort of questions that we'll leave towards the end of the webinar to answer. And then you can also upvote questions that you think are particularly interesting or should be prioritized. At the end of the webinar, we will have a 3 to 4 minute anonymous survey so that you can let us know how we did and where we can improve upon. Constantly taking all of that feedback into consideration as we plan these future webinars. So it's very much appreciated. And then in about a week, you'll receive an email with information on how to download the slides from this presentation, the recording, and then any other resources that are mentioned. All right, so like I said, we want to get to know who's in the room with us. So in a few seconds, you should see a poll pop up on your screen. The first one is around experience level. So what is your experience level in the mentoring field? You should see that now and choose beginning or beginner, advanced, or oh my gosh, beginner, experienced, or expert. Give everybody another second or two to answer that. I love seeing when we have all covered at a pretty good proportion. I think that's so important. Whether you're a beginner, expert, experienced, you're welcome here. Your opinions and your ideas are valid, and we want to hear them. So thank you all for being here. I'll end that poll. Share the results so you can all see that. Looks like most of us are experienced in some way, but we do have some beginners and experts. So again, all forms and all levels of knowledge are appreciated. And then there is one more poll that I'll be launching in just a second. Maybe not. Oh, I have to stop sharing another one first. There we go. Launch. And so now this poll is around your role in the mentoring field. So choose whichever one of these best describes your role. I know, especially in this world, a lot of us wear many hats. So pick whatever is feeling best for you today, whatever is jumping out. Thank you all for voting in that. I'll end the poll now and share the results. Looks like most of us, or I guess I should say about half of us, are mentoring program staff or practitioners. And then we have some other folks in the room, mentors, educators, researchers, et cetera. So again, I think this is a conversation where all levels and all areas of expertise are really important and key to this conversation. So I will stop sharing that. Thank you all for answering those. And now for a quick overview of the agenda for today's conversation. Again, we've already done the welcome and introductions, but continue to introduce yourselves in the chat and share resources and conversation with one another. But first, we'll be getting into a cyberbullying and mentoring research overview with some actually cutting edge research performed by the person that I will be introducing in just a moment. And then we'll be getting into a presentation on an organization doing some really amazing work and innovative work called Stand for the Silent, before getting into a panel discussion and some time for the audience Q&A and resources in closing. But make sure to drop any questions you have throughout the entire time, and we'll make sure to save those for that last portion there. So now I am very excited to introduce Dr. Sameer Hinduja, who will be taking over in just a second, but Dr. Sameer Hinduja is a professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida Atlantic University, co-director of the Cyberbullying Research Center, and faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. He is recognized internationally for his groundbreaking work on the subjects of cyberbullying, sexting, and social media and gaming abuse, concerns that have paralleled the exponential growth in online communication by young people. He has written 7 books, and his interdisciplinary research has been cited over 20,000 times in a wide range of fields, including pediatrics, information technology, computer science, business, psychology, education, and nursing. As a noted researcher and speaker on youth and social media issues for the last 20 years, Dr. Hinduja trains researcher and speakers on youth and social media issues, trains technologists, educators, and mental health professionals, youth specialists, parents, and students around the world on how to promote the positive use of technology and build healthy online communities. Dr. Hinduja is frequently asked to provide expert commentary by news organizations, and his work has been featured in venues that include CNN, NPR, the BBC, and the New York Times. He has worked with numerous corporations, including Google, Snap, Twitch, Meta, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, Merrill Lynch, Verizon, and Cartoon Network, and organizations including the United Nations, the White House, the World Bank, the National Guard, the National PTA, and the Anti-Defamation League. on how to best shape policy, programs, and other initiatives. He has received Auburn University's Global Anti-Bullying Hero Award, won Florida Atlantic University's Researcher of the Year Award, presented on cyberbullying at a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill, testified in front of the Attorney General and the Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, and Homeland Security, and served as a Fulbright Specialist Scholar at Dublin City University. Dr. Hinduja is the co-founder and co-editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Bullying Prevention, published by Springer. And next up, for the other presenter that we have representing Stand for the Silent is Lauren Kiefert. Lauren is a behavioral health and wellness specialist for Prince William County, Virginia, and she has worked in the behavioral health field for the past 8 years, providing education and raising awareness for mental health, substance use disorder, adverse childhood experiences, and suicide. In a previous role, she managed the implementation of youth mentoring programs through Parks and Recreation, connecting high-risk youth with caring community members. Lauren received her Master's of Public Health from the George Washington University in 2018, and she enjoys spending time with her family, being active, and cooking. We'll introduce our other panelists a little bit later after the presentation piece, but now I'm very excited to turn it over to Samir. Oh, it looks like you're still muted.
Okay, thanks, Jake. I didn't know if we could use the phone, and you could maybe unmute that phone number that I gave you. If not, I'm ready to roll.
I think I'm clicking ask to unmute, so maybe you should be getting a notification there. But either way, okay, it works.
Sure, let me just try one more thing.
We cannot hear.
All right, thank you. And let me go ahead and share my screen if you don't mind. Everything look good? Let me get these toolbars out of the way. And again, I appreciate your patience as we just worked through these technical issues. I'll minimize all of these other Zoom-related pop-ups, and we can get started. Thank you so much for joining us. This issue obviously is one that we care about a lot, and perhaps it's on many of our radars as we begin another school year. So my hope is that we're able to provide you with the backdrop of newest research in this area, but then move quickly to actionable strategies, because you're here and I'm here because I want to keep learning and you want to keep learning about what we can do to assist the youth that are under our care. So we'll get started. First off, I think about all of these platforms, and one of the questions I get the most has to do with, is there specific platforms that our youth should stay away from? And to be honest, I kind of dislike that question, because the reality is harassment and harm can occur on any platform, without a doubt. And the reality also is that most platforms are used responsibly, respectfully, or at least neutrally by individuals, adults, and youth. And so I don't think it's wise to demonize a specific platform, even though we might say that, yes, this platform needs to be doing a little bit more, or that platform might need to improve their policies or their ability to respond quickly to any targets or victims who report and ask for help specifically. Maybe you're familiar with all of these icons. From the top left, it would be Twitch and X, or previously known as Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. GroupMe is an app that I use a lot with my family and friends. YouTube, WhatsApp, Roblox, and then the bottom row would be Discord, PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and TikTok, of course. So again, I think we should always have a balanced perspective related to apps. If we just believe all of the sensationalistic news headlines, we're not going to be very relatable to our youth, and they're going to tune us out and think that we're clueless. And so I tend to try to approach these sorts of topics involving apps or platforms enthusiastically, understanding that it does meet their needs socially, relationally, educationally. And so thinking about the positives, I think, puts us in a better state of mind in order to assist them and in order to come alongside them, which you and I would do anyways if they're dealing with any issue, especially those that are non-technical. Then I think about cyberbullying, and I think about how it is an issue that first came across my desk in the early 2000s. And we were, of course, focused on how it was affecting a select group of youth in very significant ways. And then we started to see that This is happening across text, across social media platforms, across gaming networks, and in different forms and varieties, which I'll get to in a second. We just usually conceptualize it as harm or harassment that's taking place repeatedly, but using technology, whether it's your phone or whether it's, again, one of these platforms or one of these online environments. What we do tend to see is that it typically occurs hand in hand with regular harassment or regular bullying. And typically the aggressor is someone that a peer knows from school, from an after-school activity, a club, a sports, something like that. So there typically is a relationship there. It isn't usually stranger danger, some random amorphous person out there across the web. As Jake was referencing, and again, Jake, thank you for that kind introduction and just setting us up for our time together. We do have some brand new data, which I've never shared before. We collected national data across youth between the ages of 13 and 17 years of age recently. And as you can see, again, just as a quick reference point, we don't want to spend too much time on the research. About 1 out of 3 have been bullied at school in the last month. About 3 out of 4 have been bullied at school in their lifetime. About 1 out of 2 have been bullied online in the last month, and about 1 out of 2, a little bit higher, have been bullied online. So again, just a reference point of thinking about, let's say, middle schoolers and high schoolers across America. I also wanted to try to break it down a little bit more specifically, and you can see that again, 68% have been bullied at school, 78% have been bullied at online, 30% have been bullies others at school, and 13% have cyberbullied others. And these are female specifically. And for this specific research project, we were only able to collect data from the major genders. And so other research that we've conducted involved those who belong to other gender categories. We just don't have that research in front of us right now when it comes to our most recent data collection effort. I also wanted to try to break down for you specific types of harm. I alluded to that earlier. I know this is a laundry list, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of what's typically happening amongst youth. For example, I look down in the middle of the list and you see that it's about 18%, almost 20%, so 1 out of 5 said that somebody else has threatened to hurt them online. When it comes to a mean or hurtful video being posted by someone else about them online, it's about 1 out of 10. If you look at the very bottom, 1 or more of the above 2 or more times, and I did mention when I defined cyberbullying that we typically conceptualize it as something that occurs repeatedly, whereas harassment might occur just once. Well, it's over 2 out of 5, approaching 44%. And so I won't say this is spiraling out of control, and I won't say that this is an epidemic, but I think all of us who work with youth will agree that it's affecting a meaningful proportion of those that we shepherd. And it's occurring in these forms and in these types, whether it's stalking, whether it's impersonation, whether it's tracking, whether it's humiliation. And of course, some do cross that line and become criminal offenses related to threats. And of course, if you're targeting someone based on an identity-based characteristic, such as sexual orientation, gender, religion, etc. So again, just wanted to give you a quick idea here. I also thought this was interesting, and it aligns with what I've typically known and what you've probably known as well. If you look on the left of the chart here, we see that about 1 out of 2 haven't been bullied at school or online in the last month, but about 1 out of 5 have been bullied at school and online. So I'm curious, is there this doubly susceptible population of youth who are being targeted in any environment, whether it's at school or an after-school activity or club, sports, etc., as well as online? And again, if you've got a peer you might encounter in both locations, it makes sense. You see that 12% have been bullied only at school and about 13% have been bullied only online. Just a couple of other charts related to data, and then we'll get into some prevention and response. So I always care about emotional reactions because the research literature is very clear that youth, many times, when they deal with heavy, very, very significant emotions, they struggle in terms of positive coping skills, in terms of being able to allow it to roll off their shoulders a little bit, and then they can just move on. What we find is that unfortunately, they can't compartmentalize very well those heavy emotions, and those heavy emotions typically lead to minor and moderate forms of delinquency, externalizing forms of harm, internalizing forms of harm, whether it's cutting or something more significant. And so what we see when it comes to cyberbullying is that it is leading to anger and frustration and embarrassment and sadness and anxiety, loneliness, and for 1 out of 5, it's leading to fear for their lives or for their safety. And so clearly we have to continue to figure out what we can do about helping them to, whether it's grow in resilience, helping them to be able to buffer against this, helping them to be able to stiff arm it, maybe change the topic or diffuse the tension, or develop other sorts of conflict resolution skills or even emotional regulation skills that can assist them. Because what is very clear is that cyberbullying affects them emotionally to a large scale. How do they respond? I love to see that they're using the tools within the app or the platform to block, to log out, and to report. Of course, I wish that percentage of 30.6% was a lot higher, because every platform has tried to make it easy for a user to quickly, within a few touches of the phone or clicks, to report a problematic account or a hateful sentiment or comment or expression. It's very disappointing to me, and likely to you, that only 13% have reported it to a school. And we see that about 13% have changed their screen name and about 7% have deleted their account. Again, these numbers should be higher. I wish that they were. Is it because in the moment, the youth just freezes, gets stuck, gets paralyzed, and doesn't know what to do? Or is it because they would say very candidly that, you know what, I'm not really happy with the types of tools or resources or mechanisms that are being afforded to me when I do want to report? Or is it because they're concerned about retaliation? What's the story? That's something we need to dig into a little bit deeper. And as we'll get into, communication can help towards that end. And I believe this is my last data slide. 70% are talking to a parent, a little bit over 2 out of 5, approaching 1 out of 2 are talking to a friend, 1 out of 4 are talking to a brother or sister. But then we get into adults. School counselor, 16%, teacher, 14%, administrator at school, principal or assistant principal, 14%, someone else at school, about 12%. Man, I pause for a second simply because we've been studying this for well over a decade, and this has not changed. Unfortunately, it's these very disappointing proportions of youth who are willing to talk about cyberbullying to the adults in their life. And hopefully that's different with you serving in a mentorship capacity. Hopefully, because of the relationship that you've cultivated and built over time, they feel comfortable. But I just feel like there's many other adults in these supervisory capacities where they are definitely not comfortable. So as we get into strategies, I want to first emphasize that we absolutely need to document instances of harassment and harm. And many of them, again, start offline, but then bubble up online. And yes, to be sure, some do bubble up online as well. I'm just asking you to make sure, even if you think it's super mild, to start a paper trail, because many times these build upon one another, and then you need to have a more severe formalized response. Related to this has to do with screenshots. When it comes to cyberbullying, we all know that there's typically digital evidence, not always, because some of these images disappear, but we also know that youth are crafty and they might use a third-party device to capture something that will disappear on the recipient device. So there's ways, but they know how to do so on their phones. Are they also taking screenshots or screen recordings on their Xbox, on their PlayStation, on their Apple Watch? Typically on every device that we buy these days, there's the capacity to take screenshots. And after school organizations, mentorship organizations, schools, law enforcement, any adults that want to get involved, they deeply need the evidence. And then I mentioned screen recording, but this is key. We want our youth, when it comes to TikToks, when it comes to Instagram Reels, when it comes to stories on Snapchat, any sort of short video content, we need the screen recording because that's digital evidence as well. And hopefully all of our youth, those that we care for, they know, and they've even set it up so that it's very, very convenient for them to quickly open up their command center on an iPhone or to scroll down on an Android device from the top in order to allow for screen capturing, again, to get that digital evidence, which is so essential. Many youth, when it comes to what they want to see happen when they've experienced cyberbullying, is they just want the problem to go away. And in order to accomplish that, we have to take the screenshots and the screen recordings and send it into the platforms, to the apps, so that they have visible proof of a violation of their rules or terms of service, and then they can action that specific individual or the content. So we need this, continue to remind them. Hopefully their immediate response whenever they're dealing with harassment is, okay, I'm gonna do something about this, but the first thing I need to do is to take that screenshot or screen recording. I also think it's important to continue to emphasize that we need our youth to step up. It's so hard to be an upstander, but it's key. And as an adult, hopefully we've developed the social skills and the ability and the self-confidence in order to do so. When I'm working with youth, I use a resource that was put out by Starbucks. It's a couple of seasons of short videos that are available for free on YouTube called Upstanders. And they just feature and celebrate the stories of youth and young adults who have done epic things for others in their community. So I would commend this resource to you, just as something to be able to use when you have a little bit of talking time with youth and you do want to encourage them towards that end. I also think about clubs, and you want to be careful about how you label the club. Anti-cyberbullying club probably won't gain very much traction, but if you have a creative name and you enlist students with cachet, some student leaders in your organization, I think it can definitely get the traction that it needs to get off the ground and for it to make a bit of an impact across an organization, across an after school group, across a school, in order to, again, make a difference with changing the tone, changing the sentiments associated with what is acceptable behavior and what's just lame and uncool. And yeah, we don't do that around here, which I'll get back to. We want to continue to remind them that, look, you see this happening if you're a bystander and you're assuming somebody else has brought it up, but many times they haven't. We need you to speak up. Don't worry if someone else has brought it up. Please, you bring it up as well. And then I think about mentoring and how, we do a relatively impactful job when it comes to adults mentoring youth, but how are we also enlisting and raising up older youth to shepherd and mentor younger youth? And so if you can pair them up, I think that's just so key to help the older youth grow in leadership skills and help the younger youth always feel comfortable that they have another youth to go to if they're dealing with any sort of social conflict or peer aggression, whether it's online or offline. So you can even have a formalized program in your activity or in your club, in your group to make this happen. And I think that it's just might be something that the students roll their eyes about at the very beginning when you propose it. But then when they say, this is just what we do around here, they start to see the benefits and they even reap the benefits. And then advisory groups that are made solely of students, I think they can go a long way because many students think that we don't care what they have to say and that we've got everything figured out. Maybe not so starkly, but in the back of their mind, that's kind of rolling around. But if we formally bring them together and ask them to speak up and we validate their voices in a variety of ways, they will let us know about issues that we need to know about that we can then preempt or respond to very quickly. And then we need to tap into our kids' skill sets when it comes to whether it's theater or when it comes to dance. I just feel like when we're able to use their talents and their abilities in order to help us with our messaging about, again, appropriate and inappropriate behaviors through story, through script, through role playing, it's a lot more powerful than if the adults do it. So find out what your kids are good at and tap into that and allow them to help you get the message out about appropriate behaviors and again, just what we do, what we care about, what matters to us. I've even seen after school groups and of course schools come up with specific talent shows where they're allowing and encouraging every student to come up with something specific, usually to some sort of positive song because, we're all about the positive. But then that allows each student to, again, create something that is of their own heartbeat, that sends a message that they care about this issue or they care about that. And we just have to do a better job as a group to make sure that we're conveying to everyone that they belong, that we're being inclusive, that we respect everyone. Those sorts of messages can all be supplemented and underscored through talents, through what we do on stage. I've also seen podcasting, a bunch of youth working together in order to get messages across. And this, of course, is really fun as they use technology and as they track the metrics related to who's watching and they figure out how to grow an audience. And Jake, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And so just give me a couple more minutes here. I want to make sure that we have more and more conversations, and I mentioned that. And it seems so simple to point to better communication as a way to deal with some of these issues that are cropping up amongst youth, such as cyberbullying, but it matters so much because if they're willing to come to us when things are just sort of smoldering or starting to flame up, then we can, of course, deal with it before it's this raging inferno. So, figure out what you're doing to promote conversation, even though you have an agenda, you have a lesson plan, you have activities that you've got to get through. through your time or in your time with the youth. And many times that's the forefront of our mind, but what matters the most? Communication, conversation, dialogue, just chilling with them, just being with them, letting them know you're available for them. And then I think that spirit weeks, whether you do it offline or online, they could be very, very powerful to, again, breed connectedness, to breed belongingness, which is so vital in order for everyone to start to think that, hey, we're here for each other and we're all in this together. Compliments pages on Instagram or on other platforms. I love it when students decide of their own volition to anonymously shout out or give props to this student or this youth or that youth, just because many of us are dying, so desperate to be validated and noticed by others. And quickly here, again, keeping an eye on the clock here, social norming. Many students might think that there's a code of silence. Many youth in the community might think that we're not ever going to go to an adult if we are facing bullying or cyberbullying. We're just going to deal with it ourselves because that's what we have to do. We have to be strong. We have to buck up. We have to grow a backbone. And I think, there's a little bit of truth to that, but if victimization is happening, we want our youth to get help. And so make sure you convey to them what are the actual norms, the actual statistics amongst your group of youth. 63% here in this case have talked to adults. 3 out of 4 have stepped in or tried to stop it when they've seen it happen. 4 out of 5 actually believe in their agency and autonomy to do something about the problem. That's amazing. Let's spread that message, and then everybody else will get on board as well. Pledge campaigns can be useful. My recommendation here is just to please make sure that those who pledge are doing so because they understand the weight of their commitment. If they're just doing it because everyone else is pledging, they're going to be talking out of one side of their mouth and then acting in a different way. And we don't want that. We want them to be individuals of honor, individuals of integrity. And we've seen many groups and after-school organizations and even schools come up with contests, whether they challenge their youth to create PSAs, public service announcements, related to online bullying or teen dating violence or any topic that youth are struggling with these days. But again, when the youth build it, when the youth create it, it's so much more relevant and powerful and awesome. So please ask them to do so. Project-based learning can be really powerful. And we have a number of digital citizenship activities, which I think are powerful, as I just mentioned, in order to just make sure that it's not about them not doing the wrong thing, but doing the right thing. And I'll share with you my web address in just a little bit. And I'm sure our other panelists will as well. Other resources we want to get to you to help you to accomplish this. One of my colleagues has come up with would you rather questions, but specific to digital citizenship. Her name is Dr. Kristen Matheson. Here are a few. She has so many others. Again, we can get these to you to use as icebreakers or conversation starters with your youth to dialogue about these issues, and then consequently get them to know that you are able to talk to them about tech issues when they bubble up. I've written a bunch of scenarios and role-playing situations, which I will also get to you with the web address I'll share with you later. But the point is, youth need to have an action plan of knowing what to do when they are targeted online. So use role-playing scenarios in that capacity, ask them follow-up questions, which also are part of this activity, which I can get to you, and you'll see how valuable it can be. Because again, we don't want them to get stuck when they are targeted. Be an askable adult. We talked about this earlier, but when I was growing up, I had so many questions about, oh, man, I have such a strong crush on this person. What do I do? Or I feel like I'm struggling with money problems and my parents are, and how do I contribute? I'm just looking around for an adult that I can talk to. Hopefully you've identified yourself as that adult that they can talk to. And then anonymous reporting systems, they're valuable. Hopefully you can figure out a way to implement these if they're not already in place, because youth want to speak up. They just don't want it to bite them in the butt, and they don't want to be targeted for retaliation, and they don't want to be labeled as a rat or a narc or a tattletale. So figure out whether it's a text line, there's something that you can do. And then here's my last point. Again, thank you for hanging in there with me as I took a little bit, 4 extra minutes. I was a Silverhawk when I was growing up at my high school, and we were taught to soar above. We were taught to rise up, and we were taught to reflect the qualities of a Silverhawk at all times, during school, after school, weekends, winter break, summer break, and even when we graduated. I'm always thinking, even to this day, about what should I be reflecting because I'm a Silverhawk? And so hopefully you're conveying messages like, this is just what we do. This is just who we are. so that they're thinking like, I shouldn't do that because I'm going to get in trouble, to I wouldn't do that because I'm a Trojan, or because I'm a warrior, or because I'm a cardinal, or because I'm a silverhawk. So yeah, we're more mature, we're better than that, we're classier than that, we're not toddlers anymore. All of these have to do with your messaging strategy in your mentorship organization or group or at your school. And I think it's tied into like esprit de corps and school spirit. It's all part of that belongingness and connectedness that you're trying to cultivate. Here's my contact information, but I'll make sure that I pop that in the chat window, and I'll be hanging out so that we can do some Q&A. Again, I appreciate your time. There's so much more to say, but I hope that this is just the beginning of a dialogue amongst everyone here, attendees and panelists, so that we can continue to co-labor as we support our youth. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samir. And please never apologize for taking more time. This was, I am taking notes on my end. I'm eating this up. So we really, really appreciate your expertise, your research, and your attention here. And so there's absolutely no worries. Let me share my screen and I'll pass it over to Lauren.
Okay, can everyone hear me all right? Perfect. Okay. Hi all, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you all being here and for your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Hinduja, for your excellent presentation. Your bio is a very hard act to follow, so please bear with me here. But yeah, all great information, and just like Jake said, you know, taking notes, mental notes, everything. It's really, really fascinating, the research behind all of this. So thank you so much. I am here today on behalf of an organization called Stand for the Silent. They are a nonprofit started back in 2010 by high school students located in Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, after hearing of the passing of an individual named Ty Field Smalley, who I believe was either 11, 12, 13, very young age, who died by suicide after retaliation against a bully and being suspended from school. His parents, Kirk and Laura Smalley, have made it their mission to travel around the United States, travel around the world, and using their platform, Stand for the Silent, to share their story about their son and spread awareness about the dangers of bullying and now cyberbullying, as we are about 13 years out from the development of this organization. So it's really inspirational. You could just see the passion that that Kirk has. Kirk, I'll get into it in just a few moments here, but he travels, does presentations, sharing awareness and educating youth, parents, caregivers, mentors, etc., and just really hearing about his story and his efforts to combat bullying and cyberbullying. Go to the next slide. Okay, so like I just alluded, Kirk travels to schools across the United States, across the world, sharing his story about his son and his efforts to inform others, particularly youth, about the dangers of bullying and cyberbullying and what it looks like to be an upstander, as Dr. Hinduja referenced earlier, raising awareness. And his goal is to start a chapter at each participating school or site. There's other entities that participate, church groups, local clubs. Oh, I apologize. I'm getting a notification on my internet. I hope I don't lose you all, but just a heads up, my internet was being a little iffy, but I think we're still good. Okay. And really including students that are committed to changing how they treat others, how their peers treat others. So again, going back to that social norms concept of, I wouldn't do this because I am, on the baseball team, or I am a warrior, or a, whatever the identity is. Just spreading that messaging and spreading that awareness and that sense of identity and belonging. Next slide. Something that I wanted to share in today's webinar is the Social Bullets campaign. It was an experiment that was created to show parents, caregivers, older adults, the dangers of cyberbullying and the dangers of the internet. And I know this is kind of contradicting Dr. Hinduja's thoughts about, not making these things seem so bad and scary and negative. But so the experiment was done over a period of 24 hours, kind of looking at a typical American student's life on social media. So including those platforms, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, gaming platforms, etc. And within that 24-hour period, there were approximately, I forget how many, there's over 70,000 cyberbullying posts or comments made, and there's an algorithm that kind of plugged in keywords and looked for different indicators of cyberbullying or that type of messaging. And the research showed, as you can see on the slide here, that for every 233 bullying posts, one teenager attempted suicide, which is pretty impactful. I think that's very powerful messaging, and hearing that, sorry, I'm just looking in the chat here too. Hearing that statistic as a parent and as someone who does care about, youth in the community and the younger population, that is a very scary number. And the bullying posts were also categorized into the 4 most common types of messaging or bullying. Culture shaming was one of those categories, body shaming, sex shaming, and then grade shaming. And I had the website pulled up. Let me just pop it into the chat here. You could read a little bit more about this Social Bullets campaign that goes through. Okay. Slide. Okay, and then I am following up with the positive here with a resource that was developed to support parents, caregivers, mentors in that supporting role in an individual's life. And I think Dr. Hinduja, again, I keep referencing you, but see something, say something, do something. We really want to emphasize that if you do see bullying, cyberbullying taking place, really trying to be that upstander and take action. And I think we'll get into a couple of questions later in the panel and the Q&A about what that can look like. But Stand for the Silent created a cyberbullying survival guide. This one is particularly for those parents, caregivers, mentors, how to take necessary steps to prevent or intervene when cyberbullying is taking place. Also a little plug, we are also working on a peer-to-peer resource incorporating youth voice. Definitely want to hear the youth. We've spoken with youth that have experienced cyberbullying or who have cyberbullied themselves. Just wanted to hear both sides because that's important. So we're working on a resource written by youth for youth about ways that they can address cyberbullying themselves. But this one, the survival guide, is specifically for parents, caregivers, etc., looking for key signs of cyberbullying, guidelines for conversations, so having conversation starters and what that could look like, actions for just beyond the home, whether it's getting the schools involved or other entities involved, as well as some additional resources. So I think that is all from myself, and I will kick it back to Jake.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing all those really, really essential and again, innovative resources. I'm really excited to hear more about the peer-to-peer work. I think I saw somewhere in the chat, Tito over in Portugal mentioned that a lot of the youth in their program are reporting to each other. And so I think that's something that probably also in my experience seems a lot more common in terms of youth connecting with one another to talk through these issues. So really trying to figure out how to prepare youth to be able to hold those conversations and help one another, which I think is some of what we'll be getting into in the panel discussion. So before we get into that, I want to introduce two more incredible people that will be a part of this conversation. Kamal is originally from Aldie, Virginia. Kamal is a third-year student at the University of Louisville, studying biology, Spanish, and public health. He plans on pursuing medicine in the future, specifically hoping to work in the oncology field. And as a student, he has been a mentee as well as a mentor in his role as president of the College Mentors for Kids at Louisville. On the NMRC Youth Advisory Council, Kamal works to elevate youth voice in the mentoring field and connect programs with valuable mentoring resources. And next up, we have Gary. Gary is a passionate youth mentor at Linked Mentoring. That's a mentoring program that I also work with outside of my work with Mentor. And just another little plug, Gary's one of our absolute best mentors, not just saying that because he's here. He's such an incredible person. Make sure to connect with him after this. He has a lot of insight and wisdom to share in this world. But Gary makes a difference by sharing knowledge and skills, encouraging personal growth, and creating safe and inclusive arenas necessary in youth success. Gary is a dedicated and empathetic mentor whose commitment is guiding, supporting, and empowering youth. So with that, I will turn it over to Kamal.
Hi, everyone. As Jake just mentioned, my name is Kamal, and I'm going to be the moderator for the panel discussion portion of this webinar. So the first set of questions are really going to focus around how to identify cyberbullying effects and then recognizing signs, kind of as a guide to help parents or mentoring programs and mentors themselves. So the first question is going to be directed at all our panelists, but what should mentoring practitioners know when training mentors to recognize signs of cyberbullying in their mentees?
I'll just jump in.
Take that one.
All of us are going to probably be on the same page. Oh, sorry, Gary. I'll be brief. I was just going to say that just being keyed into any sort of emotional or psychological changes or differences. I mean, you probably know your youth and their temperament and how they typically are. And if you see that something's amiss, something's probably going on, because when you're an adolescent, you just feel things very deeply and life affects you very, very heavily. And so at that point, you try to figure out some sort of way to broach the conversation and get some entree into their lives, and hopefully they open up to you based on the relationship that you've built. Gary?
Thank you, Doctor. Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of that a little bit. A lot of times, at least in my mentoring experience, we see and pay attention to like patterns of behavior with children, right? And that tells a lot about where they are and where they are that day, even if it's just something that happens small that day. So I pay attention a lot to like the withdrawal that occurs, like when something happens, I see the frustration amount and then like the withdrawal, whether they like block their social media account or they're changing friend groups significantly. There are like a lot of really big red flags that can tell you that like something's going on. And to be able to like find a way to connect with that child or that youth in those moments to build that trust, so that they can feel comfortable coming to you and there's no shame or any guilt or anything in those situations. So.
And then I will quickly add to both Gary and Dr. Hinduja. Really just like what was mentioned, paying attention to the youth. If you need to get in their business a little bit, that's okay. I mean, in the long run, if that's going to help them, just pay attention to their patterns, like Gary just mentioned. If they typically are on their device or their laptop or gaming for an hour an evening, and then suddenly they're not doing that, perhaps that's a good conversation starter and way to approach that individual and say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been playing your game. Is something going on? Or just have a conversation. And I think it's also important to understand trauma, a trauma-informed approach. So also understanding that individual's background and what else is going on with that, not what is going on, but is there anything that you need to be sensitive of when you have that conversation as well?
Thank you all. Those are all great responses. And I had just one follow-up question. So when you are looking for signs of cyberbullying is it okay for a parent or a mentor to monitor their mentee social media account to just check up on it, or would you consider that like a breach of privacy?
Go ahead.
Thanks, Lauren. This is such a sticky subject, and I really can't wait to hear other people's perspectives. From my perspective, if they're young and if they're under your roof, I think that you have every right to be as highly involved as necessary. And for sure, you're going to get some pushback if they're 15, 16, 17, but they're still under your roof. And maybe by then you say to yourself, you know what, they have not violated my trust. And maybe I don't need to be as involved as I was when they were younger. And I'm going to give them some space. But it's just a individualistic type of situation where you size up your relationship and how they've acted in terms of character and integrity and maturity in the past, and then you make a determination.
Yes, I agree. And I think speaking as a parent as well, I think that's okay. I know that I would probably be a little bit more, in the beginning stages. I have young kids right now, but once they reach that age of maybe 13, 14, 15, especially nowadays, I think it's very important for the parents to be involved and kind of have a better sense and understanding of what is going on. For a mentor's role, I think that gets a little bit tricky, but I think definitely as a parent or caregiver role, I think that's important in the early stages of social media use and gaming use.
Mm-hmm. And especially like with the distinction between mentor and parent, another thing is that the mentor could work with the parents in order to have them monitor instead of them doing it themselves. So our next question is, how can mentors create space for mentees to talk about their cyberbullying experiences? And I first wanted to kick it off with Gary. In your experience as a mentor, maybe with your mentees or potentially hearing from other mentors, how have you approached the conversation of talking about cyberbullying?
Thanks, Kamal. First, I just want to make it clear that these conversations are often difficult, right? Like it's often like complex and complicated. And like Lauren mentioned, there's like a sensitivity that you have to like what this person has been through. From my experience, a lot of times when coming to the table with these conversations, I'm going to use an example. A mentee that I was mentoring was being harassed sexually, and those kinds of conversations during the adolescence are embarrassing, and it's not something that they want to talk about. So I think when in these conversations, when you come to the table and you make it clear that you want to have this conversation about, how we're going to do this, I think it comes with a level of like connectivity. Like you got to find a way to connect with the youth and show them that they can trust you. You got to show up, even when they don't necessarily do the right thing, like you still have to consistently show up and show them that, this is all a normal part of life. Unfortunately, harm and fear and hurt, these are all things that humans and children are normal parts of life. However, I will say that it's important to make sure that they also know that there's no judgment in these situations. That a lot of times I like to make it clear that what they say to me, given the context of it, is confidential, because there are some things that we have to report, right, to the parent or to authorities. But there are certain conversations I think that are crucial that happens between mentors and mentees that create that trust where these children and youth can come to you and be honest about what's been happening. That sort of self-advocacy that you can build through intentional acts.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was a great response, and definitely like creating that safe space as a mentor is so needed in so many people's lives. In your experience, have you also found that mentees are more likely to come to a mentor as sort of a third party in place of their parents, or?
So this is another very complicated situation, especially because you want to respect the parent relationship, right? You want to like advocate for that the most. And a lot of times, or at least in my experience, these conversations happen without the parents' knowledge. And you want to make sure that in these conversations that you're navigating it with a kind of like sensitivity to the fact that you don't want to create friction between the parent and the child, because we don't know what's happening in those moments. Because as much as I want to believe that all parents, support their child, their identities, who they are, the reality is that's not always the case, right? So we have to be careful about, what we do in those moments. So yeah, that's why.
Mhm. My next question is for Dr. Hinjuta. In your research, have you found that there's a distinction in the willingness to report cyberbullying acts in place of in-person bullying? Like, is there a hesitancy or a stigma around that?
That's an interesting question. We haven't studied that specifically. If I were just to speculate, I guess I would call it informed speculation. I would think that maybe there's even more hesitance to report cyberbullying simply because there's a perceived level of ignorance amongst adults, and so youth are like, I don't even want to get into this, because then I'll have to explain the technology and why I was or was not able to get a screenshot and whether this is anonymous or not. So again, that's just me speculating. I think that'd be an interesting research question. And maybe many, along with that, many students think, okay, the administrators here, they might be not so familiar with technology, but they know bullying. And so I'm definitely going to bring this up more readily to them at school, or again, in the community if it's a mentoring organization.
Definitely. Thank you. And our next question is, what should the mentoring program keep in mind when navigating cyberbullying that their mentees may be experiencing?
I can chime in here. I think it's important to understand the dynamics of cyberbullying. It can be, persistent. It could be hard to notice, and it can also be permanent. A lot of times, we're connected to our phones, or youth are connected to their phones, devices, 24/7. Messages can be coming in, or posts can be made, at all times, which makes it really hard for parents, mentors, adults to notice it. They're not hearing it. They might not necessarily be seeing it if they're not on these different platforms. So I think it's important to educate adults and parents and mentors, about the nuances of cyberbullying and where it can show up. And I think, sorry, I had something else. Oh, the permanency of it. It could be hard to get different types of messaging or posts or things taken down. I think that's also important to share. Just when trying to help an individual that is experiencing cyberbullying, that it could be out there for whoever knows, whatever length of time. And I think, of course, following up with being aware of the resources that are available to help parents and caregivers navigate cyberbullying, as well as if, helping to navigate if they're working with a youth that is doing the cyberbullying themselves, how to approach that and what that can look like, and what types of conversations and support are needed in that instance.
Yeah, I think it's so important that not just recognizing when someone is being cyberbullied, but also someone is doing the cyberbullying, and how to go about that as a mentor or as a parent.
Sure.
So now we're going to shift the conversation towards how can we help youth conceptualize and process violence that they may be seeing online in terms of media literacy. So how can mentors support mentees in developing this media literacy?
Thanks, Kamal. I'll go ahead and take that one. So I think at the root of developing any kind of literacy is education, right? The education provides us with a sort of awareness about what things are, and understanding how these things may be perceived, because how I perceive something may not be something how my mentee or their parent perceives something. So sort of like created this collective understanding of what is what and who is who, and like what's happening in those moments. With that, I feel like education also provides us with a sort of like empathy, for like what happens in those spaces, and understanding what we're seeing, because a lot of times, I'm not just going to say that video games do this, but like a lot of times the world that we live in creates this desensitized notion that violence is okay. That like, oh, this happened in a movie, or we saw this in school and nobody did anything about it. And I think informing and educating not just the mentees, but me, myself, other mentors, parents, staff, administrators, and all of the adults in the kid's life to like how pervasive these things can actually be.
I love that, Gary. And just to build on that, I wrote a piece on how media literacy can prevent cyberbullying and online harm, which I'll post in the chat. But the main points that I brought up have to do with, I alluded to this earlier, we want them to be able to create positive content. We want them to be able to create content that defends those who are being targeted, or speaks up for those who are being targeted. And how can they do that strategically? How can they do that without then inviting other attacks on themselves, but just do so in a logical, intelligent manner? I think that's a skill that could be taught and learned in media literacy. Also, we see a lot of individuals who fall prey to fake content, whether it's deep fakes or whether it's impersonation, etc. And so being able to analyze what they see out there and then quickly make a determination instead of swallowing everything as fact will help to preclude victimization from occurring. That again involves media literacy education. And then finally, we want them to constantly be evaluating the fire hose of information that comes in, so that they're again able to discern, what is problematic, what is not so problematic, what is sarcastic, what is definitely a attack, etc. Because communication, as we know, occurs along a continuum, and to be able to more deftly appraise, where that content falls, I think is a valuable skill, but just comes with time and teaching. So check out what I posted, because that continues to go over some of those points.
Thank you, Gary and Dr. Hinduja. There's definitely so much information that's just like funneled online at children, and it's so important that they're able to sort the good from the bad and know where they can draw the line. And that ties into our next question, is how can mentors actually help mentees identify what their boundaries are? And how can they also help them identify when they're being cyberbullied? What crosses that line?
I will jump in here, and then other panelists, please feel free to elaborate, because this will probably be just a little bit brief. But in my experience, I think helping the mentee understand what makes them uncomfortable, I think is a pretty good indicator of where that line is drawn. If something makes them uncomfortable, help them avoid a plan to avoid whatever content or media or interaction that they're having. We talked about this before: reporting, blocking, changing accounts, going to the school, or trying to get other parties involved to reduce whatever cyberbullying or whatever maybe inappropriate content is being shared. Setting even like parental settings or filters. Nowadays you can, I think at least on Instagram, you can change your filters so comments with like certain words or phrases don't show up. So using those types of I guess ways to navigate. And I think this probably goes into another question that we'll be answering shortly, but the types of like coping skills and things like that, ways to I guess help youth still utilize these platforms. Like Dr. Hinduja said, we want them to still be able to, have their own space and, have positive messaging and things like that, but in a way that is safe to do so.
I'll go ahead and add a little bit to that too also, Lauren. Like Dr. Hindaji said earlier, it's about creating these safe spaces, right? And understanding what that looks like for the child or the youth, because it's going to look different for all of them. You know, what's acceptable to them, what's unacceptable to them. And I think a good way for mentors and parents and, you know, caretakers that are involved is modeling that behavior, right? Showing them what that looks like in real time and how they can translate that to a virtual space. At least I've seen I'm not a huge on like social media and live streaming, but I know a lot of youth are. And I've even seen some circumstances where youth will take the initiative and become an admin or a moderator for that space. And they will help decide what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in those spaces. So I think that kind of like, building that kind of autonomy in the youth, right? And that sort of agency that they know that they have control over what they see and what they don't see can provide a lot of area for growth, you know, and it allows us to like empower them to be, you know, advocate for themselves in those spaces and, you know, tell people what is acceptable behavior, what is not acceptable behavior, what are warning signs and red flags of possible harassing or bullying behavior, and what's joking and what's not joking. Because a lot of times I see that jokes get taken the wrong way or inappropriately, because in online spaces, context is everything. It's hard to read somebody's body language or their inflection in their voice of what they actually meant in that moment. Because I know it's happened to me personally, where I take a text message the wrong way or an email the wrong way, and it wasn't meant that way. So I think teaching kids that awareness of, you know, what boundaries are, you know, and how to translate that into a virtual space will be incredibly helpful.
I can definitely relate with the taking of a online text the wrong way, because there's just, you lose that connection of in person. You're not able to laugh it off, like, unless you send emojis. So it's just a completely different setting, different context, and you need a whole set of skills in order to interpret that as well. And our last question is, our last category is, how can we cultivate youth action via peer-to-peer mentoring and youth adult mentoring? So what role do you see youth playing in this? And then how do you get youth buy-in? I wanted to start with Lauren, because you had mentioned that you're currently working on a resource that is written by youth and for youth. So how were you able to recruit youth to help you on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Great question. Really going where the youth are. So not trying to bring the youth to us, but reaching out to the youth in the spaces that they're already interacting. This was done virtually. So we did like an online campaign, kind of talking about the resource that we were interested in producing. So we wanted to develop a peer-to-peer resource, you know, with youth voice, have the youth share what they wanted to see in this resource. And I think that's how you also get that youth buy-in, really listening to what they have to say, incorporating their thoughts and their ideas and acknowledging their experiences, because we can sit here all day and say, hey, I think we should do A, B, and C, and this is how we develop a resource for youth, and, you know, all the evidence-based practices, that's great. But at the end of the day, if this is a resource for youth to develop and implement into their own lives and find valuable, we really need to hear from them. So we recruited youth, like I said, via Facebook, and spoke with them. We did focus groups and things. And we spoke with both youth that experienced cyberbullying, youth that had performed cyberbullying for whatever reason. We tried to get a very diverse group of youth in the room together. So age, gender, race, as well as the different types of cyberbullying that they experience. Like I referenced in the Social Bullets campaign, it was broken down into cultural shaming, grade shaming, sex shaming, and then there's one more that is escaping me. But we made sure that we hit all four of those categories there, because we wanted to have an accurate representation of the different types of cyberbullying that these youth experience. So we held focus groups, we asked them questions, got their insight and their ideas, and heard, you know, their experiences. And again, really making sure that we're listening to what they want and what they would find helpful. So I hope that answers the question, and would be happy to elaborate if need be.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. As a member of the Youth Advisory Council for the NMRC myself, I'm the biggest proponent for elevating youth voice,
Absolutely.
especially because something like social media and all these online platforms, the youth are the ones who are growing up on it, and they're likely going to be more comfortable and well-versed in the nuances of the social media platform. And so talking about it to somebody or hearing recommendations from somebody of an older generation who may not be as
Right.
knowledgeable about it might not have the same effect as hearing it from a peer who they know is using the platform in the same way, seeing the same content. And that brings us to our last question of this discussion. Where are you already seeing mentoring happening in this virtual online platform? Is there natural peer-to-peer mentoring that's already taking place?
I can just briefly chime in again. During the focus groups that I just mentioned, we did ask the youth, if they have experienced cyberbullying or if they have seen it on their social media platforms, et cetera, and what that looks like, and if they had any advice for other youth or kind of how they approach the situation. And in these focus groups, we heard that some of the times they would chime in and support the person that was experiencing cyberbullying, saying, oh, block this person, or whatever the mechanism would be to kind of silence the cyberbullying. They were, it was really neat to see that they were in support of their peer, and making sure that they took the measures to overcome cyberbullying or address it. So I guess that's kind of more of an informal peer-to-peer support, not necessarily like, formal mentoring taking place, but it was interesting. And I think it's worth noting that, there are youth out there that will stick up for their peers, whatever that may look like. And I think that's important, and that's a great peer model.
Yeah, that is so inspiring here. Thank you, Lauren.
Sure.
And it looks like I missed a question, but this will be our final question. What kind of coping skills can mentoring programs provide youth, and how do we build youth resilience in these spaces?
I can start with this one. Thanks, Kamal. So from my experience, and I don't have a whole lot of it, but I would say I have enough. Cyberbullying and virtual spaces create this sort of like anxiety and stress and distress sometimes for youth, even youth that, haven't been bullied. There's this kind of like social anxiety that still occurs in online spaces because, we all want to be validated. We all want to be heard. We all want to feel like we're a part of, we all want to feel worthy. And I would say in these moments when, if cyberbullying is happening to people, I find it helpful in my own life and with my experience with mentees is that this sort of like mindfulness approach to these interactions has been significantly helpful, whether it's like a breathing exercise or like a short guided meditation or other like mindfulness-based stress reduction strategies that are helpful in, just kind of taking an escape from that moment, recognizing what you're feeling and what's happening, and then setting that boundary and removing yourself from that situation. Additionally, like building this on the strengths that child has or the youth has or the mentee has is, I think, significant in navigating these spaces, because a lot of times people will look at the negative aspect of it, when at least research that I've read has shown that, pushing positive emotions and short acts of kindness, whether it's online or in real life, can have significant impacts on building resiliency in youth. And I think that's what this is about, because based on what the research that, Dr. Hinjaji showed earlier, that these things are happening at a significant rate. And I guess it's not more we can do for prevention and intervention wise, because I guess as our worlds become more and more digital, these interactions are going to happen on a, significantly more increased basis. And we have to figure out ways to like prevent and then intervene and be more proactive instead of reactive in these spaces.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for this conversation, and thank you so much, Kamal, for moderating that. I think there's been a lot of really interesting pieces of wisdom and experience dropped in the chat, so definitely feel free to check that out. But now we'll move into answering some of the audience questions. Thank you all for dropping those in. There's been plenty, and it's been really cool to see all the different lines of thinking. And if you haven't noticed, there have been some that have already been answered, so go feel free to click that answered tab to see some more resources and details that our panelists have provided. But one particular area that I sort of want to dive into and really highlight that I think a couple people get at in their question is around the angle of the engaging the youth who are maybe doing the cyberbullying, or engaging others who, again, are not maybe necessarily the people on the other end of cyberbullying, the victims and the people who are being hurt by this. But how do we bring those other youth into the conversation? Again, those who are doing the cyberbullying, and maybe we'll start with Samir with that.
Yeah, thanks. For me, I just want them to feel valued. And so if we can appoint them to be leaders or responsible for this or that, and just show them that we have confidence in them to make great decisions, to be of upstanding character, of reflecting qualities that we want all the other students to have, then number one, they might be surprised. And then number two, they might rise up and say, yeah, I can do this. I've at least one adult who believes in me despite bad choices or past mistake, which all of us have. So that's what I would start with.
I love that. I think that's exactly what I would say as well. Does anybody else have anything to add to that in terms of how you've maybe engaged students who are potentially doing the cyberbullying, making those types of mistakes, and any advice for folks out there who want to expand their reach?
Oh, go ahead, Gary. I saw you come off mute.
Oh, I just wanted to add something to Dr. Hinjaji's really quickly. I think using those, when we're aware of those behaviors, or somebody's doing the cyberbullying or making mistakes, or being inappropriate in these online spaces, I think we need to use those moments as learning experiences, right? We need to like really empower the youth to recognize that they've maybe stepped in the wrong direction, and that there is coming back from that. There is redemption from that, because we're not what we do, right? We're not made of what we do. We are gonna do things that are maybe inappropriate at times, myself included. And there are things that happen when we make mistakes that can lay a foundation for correcting those kinds of things in the future. So like, I guess in my opinion, when these things are recognized, is not shaming the youth in that moment. It's really like recognize that, okay, hey, like this is what it is, and we're gonna treat it as such, and we're gonna use this as a foundation to expand and learn and create new strategies on how to do this.
Yeah, I was really just going to add saying, I think taking the same approach as you would with someone experiencing cyberbullying, just being non-judgmental and saying, why is the bullying taking place in the first place? Just being open and having that safe space for the youth to share. Maybe there's some underlying something's going on in this youth's home life that is causing them to act this way, and use it as a teaching lesson, learning experience. But I think being non-judgmental will really help that youth to open up. I think oftentimes they're afraid of getting in trouble, or there's that shame associated with it. But again, kind of approaching it with a non-judgmental lens can be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I think another part of this constellation that I see a question kind of getting at is understanding our own biases around social media and kind of, again, our role in all of this. And I think we've talked a lot about like how we can build trust and create safe spaces with our mentees or youth. But what have you all done in terms of, or in relation to your work with youth as adults to kind of dive into your own understanding of social media, cyberbullying? What are some maybe practices that you've done or things that you've implemented in your own life to think through this? And maybe we'll start with Gary.
Thanks, Jake. So I'm aware that I don't understand social media like youth do, right? I'm very much aware of, that I'm older and that I may not see things like they do. So I think that like building this sort of self-awareness around where we are allows us to have more empathy for other people in all social realms, really, not just in this cyberbullying or virtual world. I think that's one of the most key things is like educating myself, like becoming more aware of like what these apps are about, right? Like how are children communicating these days? Because it's much different than how I communicated when I was younger, right? And really understanding the nuances and the complexities of all of these interactions, because it's not just like talking in real life, right? We don't have all of that. So I think more of what's important to me about it, what I've done is recognize my own, deficiencies in understanding how all of that works and, creating that space and open-mindedness to how these things are going to continue to go in the future, because that's where we're going, like that's the way the world's headed, more globalized, more digital, we're going to be connected with more people, more and more people every single day. And I think that understanding that and accepting that is like the foundation for being able to do these things. So.
I think that's great. And something that I think in my personal work and in the youth work that I've done has been I think there's a lot of power in being an adult and saying to a young person, like, I don't know the answer to that, or I don't know exactly how I would approach that. Let's figure it out together. Like, let's do some research on strategies to cope with this, or on what does this actually mean, or where can we fact check this thing, and doing that and using the skills that you have as an adult, maybe in media literacy or in critical thinking, and using that as a learning opportunity, but also as a way to connect with your mentee and kind of demonstrate that your mentee can also teach you things, and that it's a bi-directional relationship. Does anybody else have anything else to add in terms of, I would also, Kamal, I would love to hear your perspective as well, in terms of someone who's very much grown up in this world and is very immersed in social media technology and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I would like to mention that technology is always changing. I would say, like, I'm pretty well versed in all the different types of social media. I spend a decent amount of time on it and I know how they work. But when I mentor my 4th grade student, there are some things that he says and I'm like, I feel so out of touch right now. And it's just a constant like struggle to adapt to the new times. And I can't even imagine for someone who didn't grow up with that same technology, how much harder it is. So it's just making a consistent effort, making sure to re-educate yourself. If you like know how Facebook works, that's not going to be good enough to understand how another platform will work. So just always keeping updated.
Great, thank you. One of the initial questions that I think is really important to get to was at what point does cyberbullying become criminal? I think a lot of us struggle to maybe find that line. We've talked a little bit about reporting and when to do that, and also to help youth identify their own boundaries. And maybe I'd love to hear, Samir, what are your thoughts around that in terms of finding that line?
Sure. I first want to acknowledge that it's so difficult when you reach out to law enforcement because you are convinced it is criminal, and it very well likely is criminal, and they shrug their shoulders, or they don't know what to do, or they don't have the resources, or they don't have a specific computer crimes unit on site to deal with it. And you're left wondering, should you contact county police or state police, or you just feel helpless. And so again, I just want to acknowledge that that's a reality for so many individuals across our communities here in the United States. So threats obviously cross the line and become criminal. We've seen that identity-based harassment also can become criminal. We've seen privacy violations in some jurisdictions become criminal. And then also we do see stalking, where you're tracking somebody and specifically causing them to fear for their own safety or their family's safety. That crosses the line and becomes criminal. We see blackmail and extortion more and more now, given the fact that nudes are being exchanged so readily and easily by youth and adults, and oftentimes two individuals that they don't fully know and don't fully trust, perhaps someone that they just connected with online, who might be working with somebody else. I mean, we deal with so many sextortion cases on a weekly basis. So just make sure that's on your radar too. Those are a few things that come to mind, Jake. Happy to hear from other panelists as well.
I think I want to add a little bit to that, Dr. Hitachi. I think in my opinion, at least, when it comes to like the harassment or discrimination based on like race or gender or sexual orientation or gender expression, that to me is when it constitutes that fine line of whether it's something that should be reported or not. Because we don't want to let it escalate and continue to go to the point where it turns into a hate crime. We want to make sure that the vulnerable populations of people are protected, but also like that we understand like what we're actually seeing and what's happening.
Lauren, in your experience, did you have anything to add in terms of kind of figuring out that line when it comes to when is something that maybe you could talk through with your mentee versus something that you should report?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I think Gary and Dr. Hinduja covered it. I guess one thing I will add is perhaps checking with like your states, and now the name is escaping me, the mandatory reporting laws and things like that. Perhaps that could be a resource to utilize and look at. But again, I unfortunately don't have much experience with that. So I would defer to Gary and Dr. Hinduja with their comments, or checking, I guess, with your state or local government laws and regulations.
If I can add one more thing.
Yeah.
So as you were talking, Lauren, I remember that like we know a lot of times that cyberbullying is anonymous, right? But it is somebody that person knows, likely. And from my experience, law enforcement can't really do much with that, right? They can't really do a whole lot with anonymous extortion because it's hard for them to find reasons to use the resources to investigate that kind of thing, especially if it was like a one-time deal. So I will say that, like, I think reporting, documenting, reporting when necessary, but also like being vigilant of how administrators in school, parents and caretakers and mentors are helping that kid through that, because it can be very difficult for somebody who maybe has an explicit photo out there being sent around the school, for example. I've had experiences where this happened, and threats of self-harm and unaliving and all of that is incredibly scary, and it's incredibly real. And also, people that have different abilities, or disabilities, or living with impairments are also a vulnerable population of people who should be allowed to be protected and have voices in virtual spaces, because that's where the world's going. And I fear for the anonymity part about virtual spaces for people of vulnerable populations specifically.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that. And I know we are running up against time, but I do have one final question for anybody who would like to answer. Just in terms of, to wrap us up, does any of our amazing panelists, do any of you have any parting words for folks, something maybe that they can do immediately after this webinar, whether they work directly with youth, if they're supporting a mentor, or again, maybe for themselves in analyzing their own biases? One kind of action step after this.
I really like the one question that was in the Q&A related to the fact that, okay, some of us are not technologically savvy. And so does that immediately put us at a disadvantage to help the youth under our care? And I would say no. I would say you just continue to focus on all the things that you have been doing to raise and to care for and to generate decent human beings, individuals with kind hearts, individuals with moral compasses. You just keep working on that and help them to believe in themselves and their ability to not just take it like a punk when they're being targeted, that they know what to do, that they can come alongside others who are being targeted, and they can even, sort of help those who are struggling and who are taking those struggles and using them as a reason why they should be able to target others. So you just keep doing what you're doing and focus on those soft skills because they do matter so much.
One thing that I will chime in, I know a lot of folks here in the webinar and perhaps listening later on do work, have your mentoring programs and work with youth. I think implementing some type of bullying or cyberbullying language in your policies and procedures, standard operating procedures handbooks and things like that will be really important, especially if you were to ever come across a situation within your own mentoring program or within a mentor-mentee that will hopefully help guide you and how to navigate that situation. Already having those policies in place can be really helpful. So that is my little tip for the day. And I hope that's helpful.
I wanted to leave you all with one strategy that would allow youth to be more willing to open up about cyberbullying is when you are doing check-in talks or just catching up with someone, even something as simple as asking like, is everything going okay online with your friends? Like, have any issues come up on social media? And then that'll provide a pathway for them to talk about it without having to bring it up themselves.
If I can add one last thing as a strategy, I would say education. There are hundreds and hundreds of resources out there for us to access. And I think staying at the forefront of, understanding where social media is, where our children are, and, continuing to find new ways to connect with, our own children, our youth, or our mentees, will really keep us, in the more proactive range for when these things happen instead of like damage control. And continuously, and I think listening and believing children when mentees, when they tell us something is incredibly important when building that trust.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I'm so glad I asked that question. All four of you had such different and such important things to add there at the end, and I think really encompassed what an amazing and helpful conversation this was. I think to Gary's point, there are so many resources that have been shared during this webinar. Please check those out, take advantage of those. We'll be sharing those after the webinar along with the recording. So feel free to click through those. We'll also be sharing contact information if folks would like to get in touch to discuss anything else. But a huge thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists, Gary, Kamal, Samir, and Lauren, for all of your incredible work that you're doing outside of this, all of the wisdom and insight and intentional empathy that you provided today during this webinar. And thank you all so much for those who attended and dropped some ideas, thoughts, and reactions in the chat. It was great to be here with you all, and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.